So I just want to start by saying thank you. I think these are really important, and I noticed that on your list of events that you're handling this year, they're very technical, and yet this particular session is very personal. I was approached by Nolene about a month ago to ask if I'd contribute, and she told me what the subject was, and I had to think twice whether I said yes or not, because what it does do is it draws out history, personal challenges from both myself, who's been through this situation where you don't feel psychologically safe, and also family and friends who've shared their journeys with me, and also colleagues. I've had the opportunity to work with different industries, from satellite industry to mining industry, where I've just recently been the HR director for 3 years, and I came away about June last year to go back into my consulting business, which is my passion around diversity and inclusion. And some of those journeys and some of those histories come out and you think, do I want to go back there again? But I do think it's relevant because this whole area of psychological safety is complex. And one of the things that really hit me was we don't leave companies, we leave our leaders. And I want to use that expression to talk about how do you create an environment where you feel safe. I won't say secure, but you feel safe in order to bring what people are saying, your whole self to work. I don't want people to bring their whole selves to work. I want to bring their best selves to work. And that's a bigger challenge, because part of the reason why we're talking about harassment is somebody's brought them whole selves to work. And we don't always want that. We want them to be adaptable to the environment they're operating in. So this talk will be about 15, 20 minutes. It's the idea behind it is a thought provoker, not necessarily to give you all the answers, but from some of my experiences that I've had in various companies I've worked with throughout the years, and some of my personal insights and mistakes. So the context, and when I spoke to Nolene and spoke to Megan, I said, you've got to give context to this. Otherwise, we do typically what most men do, which is jump into solutions. And this is not a solution. This is a bunch of questions that need to be addressed. And what I found by going back into this at a personal level, and that was both at school and in the first part of my working life, you then say, okay, how do I feel included? And what are the consequences of not feeling included? So the definition of inclusion, and you may have your own in your own organizations, are the ways in which we're perceived and welcomed by others. Yeah, the important word is perceived, and perception is reality. But being embraced and accepted is an integral part of the team. And if we don't work proactively to include, we exclude. Hopefully unintentionally, but sometimes deliberately. And those are examples which each one of you may bring to the party where it is an intention, and we need to stop that. So how do we? And who are the people who are going to be responsible? So in the research I did looking at South Africa, I'm actually talking to you from a 300-year-old pigsty in the UK. It was a converted pigsty, which is now my office, which is great, in the middle of a village in Yorkshire. But I also study what's going on in the UK as well. And it's quite alarming. And even the Trade Union Congress said that 52% of women are still sexually harassed at work, and they don't feel they can complain or anything can be done about it. Those are numbers which we need to stop. So what can leaders do? And what can I do to sort of spark in leaders' minds the fact that they need to change the way they operate? So I'm taking it from a cultural perspective. So over the last month, I started to rethink. And I thought about wiring and how our brains are wired, how much of that is inside us when we're born, our DNA, and how much of that is influenced by our society and our cultural heritages and everything that surrounds us and those influences. And then in that cultural dimension, we also need to understand that there isn't just one culture. It's not just the ethnic or race or geographic culture. There's also gender as a culture, sexual orientations as cultures. Your work that you do is a culture. You develop a language that defines your culture. So how do we think about this complexity and bring it to some simple but not simplistic solutions? And a number of the speakers, from Claire to Nicola to Martine to Bryony and Diana, will bring in their flavors and insights. What I'd like you to do, though, is I just wanted to share with you this. This concept was developed many, many years ago, but it still rings true today, and it can be developed. Some of you may have seen this before, but on this picture, there are 32 different dimensions of difference. And I use those words deliberately, dimensions of difference. And I'd like you just to look at that picture very quickly. I'll give you about a minute, and just say, in your working life, how many of those have you met? And just go through them and just tick them. And it'd be interesting to know, you don't have to share this unless you particularly want to in the chat, how many of those dimensions of difference have you met in your working life? This exercise normally takes about 15 minutes, but I'll give you a minute. So you've looked at that very quickly. You're looking at this picture and saying, okay, those are the dimensions I've met in my working life. And when I've done this exercise with organizations from Goldman Sachs through to the mining industries I worked with, through to the satellite companies I've worked with, through to learning companies I've worked with, the average is about 24 to 28 dimensions of difference that are being met throughout people's lives. And then I ask a really important question, which is, so which three of those dimensions define you as a person? Which do you relate to the most? And I'd like you to think about that as well. So which of those 32 dimensions of difference, which are the three that you would say define me, that I associate with the most? And again, conscious that I've only have a little bit of your time, this exercise requires a lot of reflection, but I will guarantee that at least two are in the biological box and the personal cultural box. Those two first layers will tend to define who we are as individuals. I'm not going to say which ones are the most, because it depends on sometimes the industry, but also the culture you come from. But usually, whenever I've done this exercise throughout the world, this comes up, that we're defined by our biology. In my case, mine is age, 65. So therefore, I'm in the last trimester of what my life is, and that brings with it difference and similarities. And the other one is my thinking style. And the final one, from just outside that, is my socioeconomic background. So those are the things that define me. Once that defines you, then say, okay, now is everyone different to me? How do I deal with that? And the reason I brought this into the equation is, if I try to solve the sexual harassment or the harassment issues, it's only one dimension. Because what happens is we define ourselves and we build a culture around our definitions. And interesting enough, what is from a human condition, we always want to be like me, BLM, not Black Lives Matter, but be like me. And we tend to look for people that are like us, and we associate with them. One of the challenges of building an inclusive and diverse environment is, how do we work and deal with and manage and connect? And the word connection is really important, with people that are not like us. So I'd like you to reflect upon that, and I'm more than happy, Nolene and Megan, to share some of these slides with you. the ones that are not copyrighted, but they can be taken, because I think this is a useful exercise if you want to connect with people in your own teams or understand what makes other people tick. The implication of being different, so you may find that you're not similar to everyone else. And as organizations evolve and grow over the last few years, the dimensions of difference becomes more pronounced. But there is a consequence of not dealing with difference. So we talked about perceived differences amongst people, be you a woman, be you LGBT, be you ethnic, you're a minority. And in most of my career growing up, I've always been the odd one out or the odd couple out in an organization. That has been both a challenge and beneficial at the same time. So if perceived differences amongst people in your organization are high, the barriers to inclusion grow, not because there's something wrong with us, it's just the fact that others, and including ourselves, don't know how to deal with those differences. So we have two groups, the in the norm group, where they have a language or a culture which becomes familiarized and embedded and ingrained. And we don't know how to deal with the out of the norm group. So this became very clear when in the UK, people from overseas, from different countries, from West Indies, from Asia, where I came from, came into the UK, into the work environment. And the in norm group still didn't know how to adapt. The adaptation had to be by the people from outside. The out of the norm group are the people who had less experience, fewer skills with interacting. So what you've got now is a dimension of in the norm, out of the norm. How do you bring those together? But if you don't break the barriers to inclusion down, the quality of work relationships break because people feel they don't belong. And one of the fundamental premises of human beings is to belong. Is I'm unique, but I also need to belong. It's at the Maslow hierarchy. If you read the Maslow hierarchy of needs, we want to belong. So that if we don't feel we belong or are part of a team, then the quality of work relationships go down. So informal development like coaching and mentoring suffers. The ability to deliver a task suffer because we don't know how to ask questions. And the resource utilization means how do we get the most from people drops as well. The implication of that is people don't develop and grow, and productivity suffers. And so there's a lot of research being done over the last few years where inclusive companies actually have incredible ability to improve profitability, productivity by 1.8%, productivity by 58%. Why? Because they belong. But it doesn't happen overnight. It happens with a lot of thought and process. So I want to come back to the purpose of this discussion and some of the studying I did. And it was quite painful for us because it brought back a lot of memories. And two examples of one where I was harassed, but at school by a teacher. But I went to the headmaster, nothing happened. So I had to use my street wideness and use the family as a means of doing that. So at a parents' teachers' evening, my father confronted the teacher in question and threatened them with more than breaking their legs. Now, that's not the way to deal with the problem, but it solved the problem. But over time, I was excluded even more. So we solved the harassment issue, but we didn't solve my development. I stayed on at the school, but you could see the subtle micro inequities that happened over that period of time. My sister went through a similar exercise as well, and she had been sexually harassed at work. But the environment that she was operating, which is a banking industry and the hedge fund industry, which is really tough, was she went to her senior partner, because it was one of the other senior partners that was harassing her, and spoke and took the risk, but she didn't feel it was a risk because she saw something in those partners that she would be listened to. And she was listened to, and the issue was addressed, and she didn't suffer. So two examples, both within my own family, of the way you deal with it. One, there was no leadership because there was denial, and I was made out to be making a fuss. And the other one was an environment where it is inclusive, where somebody's behavior was addressed in private and it changed. And that's in the space of 10 years. So what happens in the UK? What's going on in the UK? Some numbers to give you some insights. Why people leave. And this is for women, racial and ethnic minorities, and LGBT employees. And this is a 2017 UK study. They leave because of harassment and rudeness. That co-workers at the same and higher level have less education or experience, and yet they're promoted over them. Others taking credit for their work. Given assignments below their job level, even though they may be qualified or even overqualified. Feeling excluded. This is around exclusion and inclusion. If I feel excluded, I'm not going to perform. It comes back to the picture I showed earlier. Being stereotyped. Or when you know that you're being stereotyped is when the words all are being used. Offensive jokes. But I didn't mean it, they would say, but they are offensive. Being publicly humiliated. That's really bad. So where do you go from there? So in your own organizations in which you operated, what are the biases that come out? And I've noticed over the last year or so that unconscious bias training has taken a big kicking because it doesn't seem to work. How do you change somebody's natural inclination? You can't change it overnight. So I believe through the course of the day, there's going to be conversations around this. So how do you move from exclusion to inclusion? It doesn't jump. You don't go from an exclusive environment where you don't belong all of a sudden to an inclusive environment because systems and processes are being put in place. There's a journey. So you move from exclusion to assimilation where you're recognized for being different, but we're not quite sure how we adapt. But you can see the adaptation starting to happen because we realize that if we don't have a diverse workforce, we're not going to be as innovative. We're not going to grow as quickly. And there isn't that talent. There's a war for talent out there. How do you bring them into play? And then you integrate. And you integrate by recognizing differences and allowing people to be who they are. But there's still that noticeable difference, but we're not sure of what language you need to use in order to connect effectively. But we're starting to integrate. And finally, there's inclusion, where we bring our best selves to work and we feel part of the team, and realizing that the more diverse a team is, the better it can perform if you're working in an environment where profit is very important or you have to deliver a promise. But how? And the key to the how is leadership. And I know that one or two of the speakers later on are going to talk about leadership. So what do leaders need to do to create an environment that's inclusive? We have a lot of expectations, but if somebody wants to be a leader, these are some of the minimum expectations. So listen to what's not being said. Asking and being curious. Have the courage to ask questions around what you're not hearing rather than what you are, and be curious about who's working for you. Go back to those dimensions of difference and ask what makes people tick. What is their background? What is their heritage? What are the things in life that shape them? Ask about their lifelines. But be careful, but you need training in order to do that, but be curious. People won't judge you for making a mistake by genuinely being curious. Build trustworthiness. This is really difficult, but you have to build trust because you're being judged all the time on trust. And trust has a number of components. Credibility. Do you have the credibility to be where you are? Reliability. Do you deliver the promises you said you're going to make? Do you act upon what you say you're going to do? And intimacy or vulnerability. Are you willing to be vulnerable or intimate? Because there's a price to pay for that. But if you are, people are more likely to trust you. But then underneath that, the denominator is, how is this about me or about the other person? So trustworthiness is all about others. So those dimensions of trustworthiness are really, really important if you want to build an inclusive environment. And to build psychological safety, you have systems, processes, and structures, and people. Under policies, we introduced into two of the organizations I've worked with a speak up policy, where people have the ability to speak up without judgment, and any speak up will be investigated. So people knew they had a route. Code of conduct, how we expect people to behave in this environment. Processes, making it easy to be heard. And if you're worried about being heard within your organization, you create employee assistance programs. And from those employee assistance programs, we can, without knowing confidences, we can actually assess and understand the patterns of what's going on in people's mind. Where are people really worried? And in the last organization I came from, there was no case of sexual harassment. but there were cases of bullying and they needed to be addressed. And we then went back into our Speak Up program and said, well, how many people are really putting this into the agenda? Engagement and team surveys give you insights into how the climate is operating. Onboarding is critical because an expectation was set with you when you joined a company. What's happening when you actually do join? Are expectations being met from both sides of the equation? Ally or affinity groups are growing. LGBT groups, gender, women in mining is an affinity group. More and more of those help people to understand that there's a collective voice, not an individual voice. The big one that I believe in very strongly, and it's a journey I went through as a leader myself. I was a big fan of values. You know, you need to have values, and they used to be posted all over the walls. And I always remember Enron's values, which is integrity and honesty, and look what happened to them. But values are words, but how do you change people's values when they're ingrained? You know, the iceberg model says what you see are people's behaviors, but what defines people's behaviors are their beliefs, values, and attitudes. How long does it take to change somebody's values? It can take a lifetime. But what you can see are behaviors. And I always believe very strongly in my last few years of working in corporate life and being in consulting, in my last 20 odd years, where I spent most of my time, is you can change behaviors. And it starts with the top. And the leader also needs to say they don't know the answers. One of the dilemmas of working in very technical or very male-dominated environments is people think they have to know all the answers. They don't. And situational humility, by saying I don't know, encourages dialogue. So coming back to behavior, a small change in leadership behavior increases the climate. You can measure that through your engagement scores. The climate is how people feel around here. What's the pulse like in this organization? And if people are feeling great and they belong, performance improves. And there are examples today of organizations like people like Salesforce, people like PayPal, people like Measat Satellite Systems, where their productivity is improved because people go the extra mile. How do they go the extra mile? Because they feel they're doing it for each other. So what are those vital behaviors? And we need to keep it simple. One of the dilemmas of going into consulting is that people come up with 20 to 30 definitions of leadership, 10, 15 definitions of behaviors. The goal is to keep it small. And I've learned this from organizations who are very, very successful. And there are four. There are four. Okay, there are four primary leadership behaviors. Number one, vital behaviors for everyone, but starting with leadership. Number one, we speak up. We help people develop the courage to be able to speak up, both up, down, and sideways across the organization. So we give them the tools, but we acknowledge that speaking up is very, very important. And one of those tools is crucial conversations tools. The ability to stop something and nip it in the bud before it gets too far. The ability to speak to your boss in a manner which is respectful, but also gets the point across. We are accountable. We hold ourselves and others to account. So what does accountability behaviors look like? It's not just about performance management. It's about that point I read around trustworthiness, which is, I said I'm going to do this, now do it. How have you done this? So deliver what you promise. We're engaged with decisions. If we're excluded from decision-making and told what to do, we're not going to be engaged. And as intelligent people, we want to be engaged in the decisions that affect our life and our home life and especially our work life. And we demonstrate respect. Now, respect is a value, but it's also a behavior. How do you demonstrate respect? And it comes back to that point. The one skill that leaders need to develop is active listening. But listening between the lines as well as the lines as well. And what I did in the last 3 organizations I've worked with, one of those was a mining technology company, was actually put in place for the leadership, starting at the top, a 50-30-20 rule. When we did performance management, 50% of your performance was judged on the tasks that you delivered, the objectives that you set, the SMART goals. 30% was on behaviors, and 20% was on safety, because safety was a priority. Ultimately, we want to move to 50-50. 50% on the task, because safety should be embedded anyway, and 50% on behaviors. That's how you get paid for performance. And until there is something in place that shows that behaviors need to change, which then improves attitudes, which then improves values, nothing changes. So I always start with behaviors, and only 4. And what I ask leaders to do, and I've done this in the organization I'm currently working with, just choose one. And then select 4 or 5 people who are going to give you immediate feedback in how you're performing over a period of 6 months. And 1 month, every month, there's a sit down and talk about how am I doing? How am I doing? And it works. It works, but with one caveat: the people at the top need to believe this. And that's probably the hardest role of all. And I'm more than happy to ask questions. So Nolene and Megan, I've kept it fairly short, thought provokers, but I'm open for questions or challenge or support. You haven't got 2 fingers in your when you're in your chat box, but I'm more than happy to take questions now. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
And I think a really good opening, because ultimately it starts at the top, right?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Yes.
It does at the top. So I remember when I first introduced the whole concept of inclusion and diversity at the board level in one of the organizations I recently worked with. There was a rolling of the eyes, and I explained what diversity looks like. Diversity is a noun, inclusion is a verb, inclusion is a feeling. You can do the numbers game. And what is interesting, the board had seen how organizations from other organizations they'd worked with had done the numbers game. So they had a diversity of talent, from race to age to sexual orientation. And that was a numbers game, but it didn't change anything. So they're a little bit incredulous. But what they hadn't thought through was the real power of creating an environment where people are included. And this is a bit biological as well. I come back to that first model I showed, which is biology. And if you think about cells, cells work effectively if the environment they're operating in is healthy. Cells die when the environment they're operating in is unhealthy. Very simple. This is biological. So how do you create that environment? And once you start having those conversations and realizing that by leveraging people's talent, by making them feel included and having a voice, increases productivity, then people start taking notice. Because for boards, they're responsible for shareholders. Shareholders want money. It's a very simple equation. If you can connect inclusion to profitability for organizations where you are dealing with shareholders, it makes a lot of sense. But it's not simple.
Yes. So we have a question from Xavier. What would the strategy be to convince management that this would be a viable way to approach it, which then connects with the profitability?
Well, first of all, we need, it's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, it's a tough one as well. My first question to management is what's front of mind for them? And usually you find there's 3 things that are front of mind for most management. Number 1 is profitability or financial performance of the company. Number 2 is productivity. And number 3 is image. They're the 3 issues that are primarily on management's mind. That's the image of the organization, but also a self-image as well. So you then see to say, okay, what gets in the way of productivity, profitability, and image? And then you ask questions like, what's your turnover like? How are people performing? Are they able to do the best they can? And you get data. You get data from competitors, from other industries, and you show from a data-driven point of view, how high-performing companies work by being inclusive. And then you have a conversation with them, because you need to find out where they're coming from first. One of the mistakes many organizations make is you force this down people's throats. No, you need to understand where people are sitting. And then you need to share with them what good practice looks like with organizations that are successful, that have adopted inclusive practices. So get the data first, find out what's on people's minds, get the data that says, we can, if, for example, I'll give you a really good example, a simple data example. What do you think it costs you to recruit somebody, have them working for you after onboarding them for 3 months, and then losing them and having to recruit again. The average is 6 times the value of that individual, depending on the level. And at the highest paid level, it can be 10 times. So it can cost an organization up to $1 million at top level by getting it wrong, because people haven't connected or haven't fitted. So just in the retention and recruitment area, there's a huge amount of money to be saved by retaining talent. And people have choice today. People have choice today.
Thanks. We've only got about 2 more minutes left, but we've got quite a few questions in the question box. Kingsley, would you be willing to answer these in the question box, in the chat box?
Yeah, in 2 minutes, no, but I can take them away and come back to you and talk to them about it. I'll study the questions, and over the period of the day, can I come back to those, or how do you want me to play it?
If you're able to just give an answer in the chat box, that would be great.
Okay.
Otherwise, we can always touch base at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because of the time, I'm more than happy to address those questions. Will they stay in the chat box throughout the course of the day?
Yes, they will.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, and I'll do my best to answer them. The purpose of now, just to summarize, is to think about what can organizations do, but it's about parenting. Leaders are your parents. We copy our leaders. And if the leaders haven't built inclusive structures, then things like sexual harassment will not go away. You can have policies and processes, and countries like South Africa have got equality policies in play. Do you believe them? Don't know. UK, the same thing. Then why is harassment going up and not down? And so there, in 2019, another survey has been done by the Equalities Commission in the UK to find out what else needs to be done by organizations in order to affect and reduce sexual harassment in the workplace, because they said the number is not reducing. So it's still an issue around the world, but it all starts with leadership. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's hold it down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kingsley. Thank you very much.
Okay. So just in brief, if I can introduce myself, my name is Marion Green Thompson. I am the Vice President responsible for transformation at Sibanye. But I've been in the transformation business for 25 of my 30-year career. And so I think it's important that I've located some of the discussions in my talk, is that it's not specific to the mining industry, but actually could be a reflection of any organization in South Africa. So just quickly for everybody, the DMRE in the Mining Charter 3 basically gazetted the fact that we would need to achieve 30% representation of women at the various occupational levels by 2025. We are in 2023, and for most mining companies, this is top of mind because of the fact that we have 4 years to compliance. The Minerals Council has also initiated a task team that's chaired by the CEO of Sibanye, Neil Froneman, and here the achievement of this goal is being championed both within the mining houses and also internally at Sibanye-Stillwater. A consequence of the gazetting is that there's a race for attraction and retention of female professionals and female mining staff or underground staff. And as a result, there's a high turnover in the numbers of women in the mining industry as the various companies start to attract females. And in essence, one of the challenges that I suppose in the mining industry will have around this is really the fact that it's going to end up in a race for who can pay the highest amount in either retaining the employees and or attracting new employees into the organizations. The challenges of change and transition in this predominantly male environment. I joined the mining industry in 2018. And one of the first messages, or one of the first impressions I got, was that mining is a man's job. And we need to change this from that perception to mining is a job for a diverse workforce with different skills and capabilities. And I think that's really, it's really the critical thinking that needs to go into what needs to happen going forward. And so we need to look at change in policies and procedures. We're going to need to look at culture change transitions, so that there's an integration of women far more smoothly into the workforce. We're going to look at things like the cost associated with an increasing diverse workforce. When I use diverse workforce, you can also think of it as females, a larger representation of females in the workforce versus the bottom line. This comes up a lot in the conversations that we have, whether it be at the Mining Council or whether that be in WIM structures, is how do we address this preconception around the fact that recruiting women into the workforce is associated with costs. And really, we need to look at the recruitment and retention and what the changes need to happen in terms of our company strategies in order to keep the women we have within our workforce and to attract others. So if we look at the narrative around women in mining, in 2018, when I came into the organization, I sat in lots of meetings, both internally at Sibanye, but also meetings with other colleagues from different mining houses, as well as the interactions at the Mining Council. And basically, what I found fascinating about it, as somebody coming in outside from the cold and looking at this organization, was there was one issue that united both white and black males. And that issue was that women are not meant to be underground and it should be discouraged. And some of the conversations at the time, and I haven't just used examples at Sibanye, so I've just harvested some of the conversations that were being had at the time. And when we talked about women and their place in mining, one of the first things came up was women's anatomy. They're unable to walk long distance, their inability to operate heavy equipment like jackhammers. Given the fact that most men in mining can't operate jackhammers, you need to have particular strength and other requirements. And there was this inability to execute difficult tasks over a prolonged period. So if it wasn't the anatomy, we were then having conversations about the negative impact of having females in your teams, because your output determines your performance bonus. And so basically, if you had females in the team and they couldn't execute their tasks over prolonged periods, as an example, their childcare arrangements impact female colleagues' attendance at work, and the female team members cannot be relied on as they fall pregnant. Now, you'll know that this last point relates to the fact that when female miners fall pregnant, they aren't allowed to work underground, and they usually are put into positions above ground, but not meaningful work. And a lot of the complaints really was around the fact that pregnancy seemed to be a derailer of their careers. And then when you looked at the conflicting views around sexual harassment, men focused predominantly around issues that had to do with production targets and standards. So this perception that there is one standard for men and another standard for women. And one of the concerns was that when women didn't make their production targets, that they would then make allegations around sexual harassment. The woman, on the other hand, which I found absolutely fascinating, is that women in underground mining positions they hesitate to report on their male colleagues, because they have the view that if the male loses his job, the family of that colleague is going to suffer as a consequence. So to a large extent, there seems to be what I call a pandemic of silence, in the sense of it happens, but we don't talk about it. And like I said, this is not just my experience at Sibanye, but this is stuff that I harvested from discussions with other colleagues and etc. So when we look at the changing narrative, I'm sorry, I can't see the question. So if somebody could please alert me to it. So when we look at the changing narrative from 2020 and beyond, there were some interesting anecdotes that I picked up in some of the conversations that I've had with my colleagues at work. And the one woman said that when you start working somewhere, you sometimes start by not liking the job, but you end up falling in love with it. What brings me peace is that I'm the only woman where I'm working, and I always outshine them. I'm a boilermaker by trade, and I love it, and working with men mostly. I make sure that I always outshine all of them, thinking how they used to undermine me, and I do better than them now. The other colleague said that I love a challenging environment. For me, mining was challenging because I felt we are 3 women against 10 men. I get to show that we can do things that men do, or even more. That is how I got into the mining industry, and I didn't settle. I didn't want to go anywhere else. And I think for me, what is important is almost the sense of pride in the work that they are doing, even in a predominantly male environment, and the optimism that is reflected in the environment. And I see that also as an indication of the changing narrative in terms of how organizations are dealing with issues related to gender and related to women in mining. And then the last one is from a female miner who comes from the local community. And she was expressing how the external community to the mines view women miners. They don't feel that, it's almost as that women who work underground, it's a sin, and that that money is not for women. So men need to be working underground so that they can earn income for families. It doesn't take into cognizance the fact that a majority of underground female miners are single parent households, and therefore their family's existence is determined by their ability to earn an income. So ever since the Minerals Council launched, ever since the Women in Mining initiative was launched at the Minerals Council, we've had a lot of time to think about what does that mean for us as an organization in taking the organization on this journey of inclusion and diversity. And there's some commitments that we've made. And really, it's driven by the need to accelerate diversity efforts so that we can increasingly increase the representation of women across the board. And it's really highlighting the issues and or challenges that and or obstacles that are faced by women as part of this integration into the workforce. So our specific objectives are really the aim of reaching a target of 30% female workforce by 2025, increasing the number of females in positions of leadership, promote a culture of gender inclusion and equality. We are looking at the value proposition. So how do we differentiate Sibanye as a workplace in order to attract and to retrain female graduates? We develop policies and we promote a culture, and there have been a range of activities in the organization that we've done, from what we call under the tree sessions or coffee sessions. We have strategic conversations where the issues related to WIM are discussed on platforms to the top leadership. And so there's a whole range of interventions that are currently happening. The other thing that we've also looked at is high potential females from a talent management perspective, and how they get access to leadership and mentorship programs in order to assist with their career advancement and leadership development. So that in essence is our commitment to achieving the objectives. And like I said, each of these streams they're different work streams in order to ensure that we achieve this. Sorry, okay. So I did a little bit of introspection around the evolving perceptions of WIM. And I've worked in the steel sector as well as the mining sector. So a lot of my views really come from the work that I've done and my observations of the changing discourse before 2018 and increasingly the kinds of conversations that we are having and were having towards 2021. And that will continue till 2025 from a compliance perspective, but this conversation is not, is an ongoing conversation. And I'm sure that the discourse will become a lot different as we move forward. Now, some of the changes that I've really noticed is that the gender dialogues have really evolved from talking about anatomy and strength tests, and rather the conversations about integration of women in the workforce. The diversity and inclusion matters actually underpin all of the dialogues that are happening in organizations. And for me, a refreshing part of this is that finally, organizations, especially in the mining industry, are creating platforms to listen to their female workforce in respect of what they identify as the obstacles, whether it's from uniforms to allocations of members on teams, but there's a dialogue that is happening within most mining organizations in order to better accommodate the female workforce. And the catalyst for these conversations has been the DMRE targets and the Minerals Council achievements. My next slide is going to actually deal with a question that I've asked myself not just in Sibanye-Stillwater, but I've asked myself in all of the companies that I've worked for previously, and we'll have a conversation about that. So how do we move the needle? I think part of what we have to do is look at the mining culture. We need to look at the attitudes and the assumptions that are no longer, need to be changed. And these will not happen organically. There has to be structured engagements in order to ensure that those attitudes and assumptions are addressed. We looking, like I said earlier, at culture change interventions across the business in order to ensure that, to Claire's point, people understand the policies, people understand the company values and the culture, and what we believed is a pro-business culture versus the traditional diversity issues around race, gender, and sexual orientation, etc. For me, what I think is really going to move the needle on any of the discussions around WIM is women need to find their voices and they need to articulate their views more transparently. We cannot be the silent voices in the organization around issues that have to do with women and women empowerment and women's issues. You're also not going to make a meaningful contribution to the organization if you are silent, if you are hesitant to voice and articulate your views. And really, that is about work content as much as it is about the culture that needs to change and the identification of obstacles and impediments, so that women are treated as in the same way that men are treated in the organization. Women really need to create a network of support, advice and guidance. And this can be a network of women within the organization that you currently work in, or it could be finding external mentors in other industries that might be able to assist you in thriving in your career because they look at it from a different perspective to the internal perspective. I have never worked in a company where I have not created a network. And the value of the network that I have always created has really been around the fact that people who've worked in the organization when you are a newcomer will, the network that you have will actually assist you in maneuvering the culture and not making mistakes and or destroying your credibility because your base of knowledge is not in place. So I'd said earlier that I was going to actually talk about the laws and the policies and the procedures. And I thought that it would be interesting to do a reflection on just how much legislation is out there, how long that legislation has been around, and why is it that we are chasing a 30% women in mining target by 2025 when a lot of this legislation was out in the 1990s. In our organizations, we have policies and they include employment equity, recruitment and selection, language policies, promotions, retention, training, and talent management. We even have maternity policies for women working underground and sexual harassment policies. So why in 2021 are we still having conversations about diversity and inclusion and stereotyping, and et cetera, et cetera? And in all of these years, why does it take the DMRE regulations to get the industry to start looking at conformance or compliance in a more meaningful way and with a lot more energy. And maybe it's not maybe it's a rhetorical question, but just because you have laws and policies and procedures in place does not mean that it will result in an enabling environment. There is lots of work that needs to be done in order to ensure, and that's speaking to the points that Claire was making around equity, equality, and diversity. So when I did an assessment of why have these targets not been met, there are a couple of things that we look at. And a lot of this stuff also comes forward when you are doing barriers reviews for your employment equity reporting. You'll find that in the mining industry, they have a traditional recruitment approach, and that's usually really family, friends, networks. And it's a tradition that is as old as mining is. And so when I worked at ArcelorMittal, for example, the matriculants of the year used to arrive at the gate, and as many of them as could be absorbed into the organization would. And these were really generations of family generation steel workers. So the mining sector has had a similar tradition, and we need to look at how that tradition actually negatively impacts women's ability to access opportunities in the mining sector. The other thing that is historical has really been that current managers, and in particular white managers, are usually not qualified for their positions, or they came in with limited qualifications at the beginning of their career and haven't really progressed those into additional qualifications. And what happens when new recruits come into the organization is that the managers perceive them to be threats, as a consequence of which a lot of, and in particular women, hide their qualifications so that they can assimilate into the teams without necessarily being perceived as a threat to managers. We also needed to look at intergenerational employment. So in the mining industry, there's this tradition that if a family member or a mine worker die on duty, or they retired because of ill health, that they can be replaced by a family member from their family unit. We really need to start evolving into looking at modern approaches around local communities getting access to training and employment opportunities. That is particularly important because it has a direct impact on the sustainability of the operations, and it reduces the impact of community unrest on the business. We need to put in boundary rules around who is eligible for the position, so that we have anybody who has the suitable qualifications for a position can actually be recruited into them without any obstacles and barriers. And the last issue for me, a non-Afrikaans speaking person, walking into the industry, is you quickly realize that Afrikaans is the language of authority, development, and orders. So if whether it be a Black or a white person whose ability to speak Afrikaans is limited, it also has a limiting aspect to your career development. In all of the discussions around women mining that I've participated in, sexual harassment for women in all of these discussions has been an issue, and in particular, not just in the mining industry, but in corporate South Africa. many women generally agreed that the companies they work for do not tolerate sexual harassment. So the issue is really not the company stance, but it's about why do women not report sexual harassment cases? And like I said earlier, for me, I asked the question, why the pandemic of silence? And I thought I'd take you on a journey that I have, that myself has had to navigate throughout my career, and the kinds of questions that go through our minds as women when it comes to reporting of sexual harassment. I mean, the first question I would ask myself is, should I report? What are the consequences of reporting? What is the price that I will pay from a job perspective, income perspective, promotion, or career growth? You know, that angry woman, the angry woman complex, where if you challenge or if you upset the status quo, it has an impact on your progression. Must I leave the job I love for another job? So do I not report and just move on? For me personally, this is one of the most difficult, one of the most difficult experience I had, because I chose to avoid and move on, and never forgave myself for not standing up for myself at the time. The other questions about, why don't my male colleagues speak up when they see inappropriate behavior? I mean, why the culture of silence, and how do we challenge our male counterparts to see unacceptable inappropriate behavior and deal with it in a meaningful way? And I think the biggest question, it really is around, when does no mean no? Sometimes it's incredibly difficult to communicate no in a way that is consistent, and not only when it relates to one individual, but when it relates to my conduct in every single instance of inappropriate behavior that I experience. And I thought that I would reflect on the case. All of us who are 702 listeners would have heard Eusebius McKaiser talk about this case for quite a lot of 2019. And it really was the handling of a case at an audit company in South Africa. And if I can just, for those of you who don't know it, basically, there was a female employee. She was a senior employee in the organization. She was in their forensics department. She had degrees. She had 2 doctoral degrees, one from Oxford and another one from a university in South Africa. She was the top of her career, and she laid a sexual harassment complaint against a senior partner who used to bring in most of the audit company's business. She followed all of the legal remedies, from laws to company policies and procedures internally. Management didn't follow their own procedures, given the status of the accused and his status in the company. The employee went and found another job. When the story became public, the new employer, who happened to be a very high-profile bank in South Africa, withdrew their offer. And the reason for that is they didn't believe that she would be a culture fit. The aggrieved employee's jobs prospect in South Africa died. I happened to be friends with the individual, and she was only able to find work on the continent outside of South Africa. And that status hasn't changed. So the kind of punishment that women feel that they would be subjected to if they report sexual harassment takes us back up to the questions that I posed earlier. And really, I think to a large extent, the cost of reporting is for women is incredibly difficult, especially as you have ambitions and you have obligations that you need to meet. So how do we change this culture without finding our voices? And I think for me, that's the challenge. It's the challenge of getting our male colleagues to understand what we mean by no and what inappropriate behavior is, and also by challenging them to speak out when they see things happening that are unacceptable or inappropriate. And from our female perspective, the core really is that until we find our voices, we will have very little impact on changing the culture. And that for the ladies and or the women on this call is my challenge to you, is that how do we change the culture? And the only way we can change it is if we start to find our voices. It comes at a huge cost, but when increasingly more cases of women taking these issues up and reporting on issues related to sexual harassment, the faster the change becomes. Otherwise, it continues to be a conspiracy of silence, and it has a huge implication on our working lives in corporate South Africa. And I say corporate South Africa really because it's not just the mining industry. And I use an example outside of the mining industry because I think it is important that people understand. It's really easy to say that people should report without actually looking at the reasons for why it is so difficult for females to raise these issues. Thank you. That's me.
Thanks, Marion. I definitely agree. You know, you'll be heard with more voices. The noise becomes louder. And definitely, I've been in a situation where my male colleagues just keep quiet, or even female colleagues just like, they're okay with it. So I think collectively, it's your own responsibility to speak up for other people too. Like, treat others the way you'd like to be treated in that sense.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you.
The discussion of this magnitude has been long overdue, in my humble opinion. Yeah, I mean, so the story I have to tell is just really our experiences that we had during a piece of work we did for the Mine Health Safety Council. This is a piece of work that we did 3-4 years ago to understand what sexual harassment is in the mining sector. Actually at the mines itself, not a desktop survey, but we actually did focus group sessions, interviewed people and what have you. So majority, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 slides, and then I've got a movie that I'd like to play to you, which was basically the outcome of what our research gave us. Okay, and if I can continue. So in essence, we visited 16 mines. For this conversation, they shall remain anonymous. 15 large ones, small, and indeed we had 26 different site visits. What we'd seen during this process was some of the mines had completely embraced the sexual harassment program and believed that a program of this nature was long overdue. And bear in mind, this is 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago. Other mines blocked us. They strung us out. We had a period of 6 months to conduct this research. It took us 3 months to get appointments to conduct these focus group sessions. And we found that officials, generally speaking, officials were nervous and suspicious about the process. Getting approval to visit was quite a tedious and laborious mechanism. During the focus group sessions with the workforce believed that if any whistleblowing information gets out, it will negatively impact the image of the mine. Okay. Generally, the mines do not, in our experience, do not want any discussions made public. That could very much damage their image. The typical sort of feedback that we got during our research, there needs to be an external independent induction process, preferably in vernacular. There should be sexual harassment ambassadors for each shaft, for each site. This could open up the lines of reporting and monitoring and evaluation. The sexual harassment program should not stop at the mine, but should go to the community. A lot of my work I do is around mining community development and upliftment in various different sectors: job creation, livelihood creation, biodiversity, and what have you. So I know that environment very well. So a mine fence, mine gate doesn't necessarily stop there. It goes beyond that into the mining community itself. Some senior officials did not take it seriously, and I've heard mentioned it before. I think Marion mentioned that there seemed to be a bit of an old boys club. I remember one instance where a couple of the senior management was driving me to a site. I was in the back of the car. They knew what my research was for, and they were openly cracking inappropriate jokes, gender-based jokes. So in a nutshell, the clear messages that came out of the focus group sessions, some of the comments that guided our final material. And again, there may be a bit of replication here from previous speakers, but I think it's nonetheless relevant because we interviewed people face to face. We saw them. We went underground. We went to quarries. We went to smelters. We did all of that type of thing. So some of the comments consisted of, I sometimes wish I was working somewhere else. There's so much of being happy to hear that you end up thinking that this is the way it is. No one will believe us. Women are too weak to work underground. It affects us in our jobs. If I want a promotion, I have to obey. Okay? Or even just keeping the job as a contractor. An example of sexual harassment that took place in the mine included when a cage is vibrating. Sometimes men would rub themselves up against other women in the cage. And if I may be as crude as to say, there was one particular instance where one gentleman ejaculated actually in the cage itself. Okay, an example of the opinion about sexual harassment included. What amazes me is that this is a man talking, women, refuse to give me my property. Think about that. Refuse to give me my property, a man's world. The messages highlighted allowed us to evaluate the depth of sexual harassment that occurs. And that it is not only women being sexually harassed, but men as well, okay? Some of the feelings associated with the participants that we interviewed, and when we conducted these focus group sessions, it was driven by gender-based, so we would have men in one room and women in one room. We didn't want any of the senior officials in any of the rooms because we felt that they might intimidate people. And that's how we got our information. Some of the feelings associated were helplessness, disrespected, uncomfortable, very low self-esteem, okay? The collateral that we produced, I wonder if I should put my face on screen, guys, so you can all see me. There you go. In fact, some of the collateral that we produced is based on 5 stories that were very prominent in our research. I'm happy to email this, this material out at a later stage. But what we try to do is make it into a cartoon format and make it sort of, we try to have a blended English and vernacular approach to it. We try to introduce some humor, although it's very difficult. We're dealing with a very, very sensitive subject. But we found this approach to be very, very good because people digested it. I remember presenting our findings to the CEO, or should I say the ex-CEO of Mine Health Safety Council. And during the whole depth of the presentation in one of the boardrooms in Woodmead there, he didn't even listen to what I was saying, he was just busy reading the comics. So I'm happy to send that out. But what I'd like to introduce to you now is a video, if I may. This lasts for 11 minutes, so I'll be well within the time frame. I believe we have some time challenges here. Please let me know, Megan, will you let me know if you can hear this?
No, I can't hear anything.
The volume comes in after about 15 seconds.
Yes, I can hear it.
This is the mining industry, defined in a popular folk song. Absence of loved ones, hardships, mystery of life and death, victory, perseverance, and hope. Since its establishment in 1867, the mining industry has always been regarded as the men's world, the boys' club, as some would call it. Transformation in the mines has included women as being part of the boys' club and also working underground. Some men still get mixed feelings by the changes. Their faces show happiness when they recall just how happy they used to be, alone, free. Even today, some of them still say, "Mo ke banna fela mo." Mining is a man's world. It's change. It comes and touches us differently. One of the women who took up opportunities presented by transformation in the mines was Thandeka. She worked underground. She wanted to make a difference. Thandeka had a saying that she was known for, "Kinao," or "Stru." Thandeka was firm, a lady whose boundaries were known. Always happy. Her carefree and strong attitude did not save her from a violent deed that she gave into. She was seen as a flower that needed to be watered. You see, men can talk in deceitful manner here, and when you understand that slang and can read beyond the surface, it can be frightening. Yes, Thandeka was raped and murdered. Her ordeal echoed the mining industry and beyond. At some point, though, someone had heard about her plotting, maybe was even part of the plotting. At some point, someone saw or heard something and chose to turn a blind eye, became silent, but you can be brave. Thandeka may not have survived this cruel and senseless passing, but her death may mean our life. During research on sexual harassment in 16 of the South African mines, it emerged that sexual harassment is happening everywhere and continues to be misunderstood. Therefore, we need to see it, say it, sway it, solve it, and stop it. As researchers continued to discuss sexual harassment, one day, one woman, Susan, broke down. For the first time, she talked about her pain, being denied permanent employment because she was unwilling to give sexual favors to the male supervisor. You see, unlike other women who allow being called Ben 10, sweetie, upakile baby, and being touched, she said no, and her no meant no. During this research, little or no reporting on sexual harassment incidents were mentioned. But what is sexual harassment? The Labor Relations Act defines sexual harassment as any unwanted attention of a sexual nature that takes place in the workplace. This is any kind of sexual behavior that makes you feel uncomfortable, including touching, unwelcome sexual jokes, unwanted questions about your sex life, whistling, rude gestures, requests for sex, staring at your body in an offensive way. Tandeka would add that when you sway something, you know you have a chance to be different, to make a difference, and that sexual harassment is both about the actual behaviors as well as the feelings that are caused as a result. Women may be few in the mining industry presently, but they are there. One of them, Nokuthula, ready to meet the world. A true perfectionist who calls herself the It Girl. She has big dreams for herself, and her family supports her. Nokuthula has lately taken interest in women support groups on sexual harassment, and she likes asking questions and learning. She often says that now she knows that sexual harassment cuts across all sexes, all races, and that men are too shy or too scared to admit that they too get sexually harassed by women or even other men. She also said so much happens at the workplace that she's been thinking that that is the way it is. The abnormal made normal. With more knowledge, she says sexual harassment requires behavior change and that she fears for those who do not know that sexual harassment has bitter results. But she says it will get better. Kabelo. He calls himself the prophet. He claims that 1994 came with both sweet and sour issues for South Africa. He argues that the parliament should come and cancel this 50-50. He fears to talk too much though. Kabelo is a hard worker and his co-workers and community look up to him. He is not well informed on some matters. He has big concerns about sexual harassment, but does not know what to do. He says women sexually abuse men all the time, and when they report them, the authorities laugh at them. Imagine. This discourages men, and they end up not reporting the incidents. Some men say when you are a quiet man working underground, women always come to kiss you or touch you. You end up playing along, since there's nothing you can do, says the prophet. He often says he's confused. He does not understand sexual harassment. When does it start? When does it end? Of all the areas in the mine, underground is the most dangerous. In general, it is dark and hot, indirectly forcing women and men into vulnerable positions. Most of the time, men and women are forced into silence for a variety of reasons. Some include fear of stigma, consequences on self and others, and of retaliation from offenders. One thing is clear: sexual harassment is broad. It has a lot of myths and misconceptions. It is spread by fear and silence. It continues to be like a dark cloud that hangs in the mining industry, so invisible and yet so visible. Addressing it requires many approaches. Some people feel that sexual harassment needs to be discussed openly, just like it is done with safety issues. Other people think that sexual harassment should be given the same seriousness and attention that was given to HIV and AIDS. They say it is a huge problem and it requires behavior change.
I say no to sexual harassment in the mines.
I stand against sexual harassment.
Let's all take action.
When you have been sexually abused, there are steps that you can take, formally or informally, and these may be followed by investigations and disciplinary action by the Human Resource Department. Yes, take that step. Remaining silent about sexual harassment solves nothing, stops nothing, but you can take action and make sure that there is zero tolerance to sexual harassment in the mining industry. See it, say it, sway it, solve it, stop it.
Hello?
Yeah, we can
Hi.
hear you, Gary.
Okay, cool. So I think that really says everything. So that's really the in terms of the DVD, the video that we produced, 10, 11 minutes worth, we tried to produce a narrative that really gets across those strong messages, okay? And I believe we managed to do that. But, this video is 4 years old. And in my opinion, it wasn't circulated or distributed properly. So, yeah, I mean, maybe that's a debate for later on. But the general conclusions that came out of the research revealed that sexual harassment is pervasive throughout the mines, okay? With respect to no barriers, age, race, gender or rank. Sorry, I'm just trying to move something here quickly. Sexual harassment is pervasive and deeply rooted. Redefining employer responsibility for sexual harassment needs to be considered. More so when we think about what Marian had to say earlier on with the 30% intake in 2025. Mining houses policies and inductions are partially flawed. They have gaps within them and are ambiguous, and there's a language problem. I mean, some of the policies that I read were really badly outdated, man. They were so old and just not written well. And to give that for people to read and digest is just not on, especially if we're looking people working on the coalface, forgive the pun. It is important to help people relate to legal paperwork and policy, make it unambiguous. This can be done by telling stories that are interesting, relevant, entertaining. We create those mechanisms, those platforms of interactivity. Management a lot of the time seem blissfully unaware of what is really happening underground or on the coalface. In all the site visits that we did, there was no call for action collateral whatsoever. A powerful education and information campaign must be developed that clarifies, and this was in my closeout to MHSC, that clarifies what sexual harassment is and sets out a zero tolerance standard. Some of the recommendations, recommendations that we put together in our closeout was short-term anonymous helpline. That never happened. We must develop training methods for South Africa's top 30 mines, HR, employee relations, occupational health and safety, unions and workforce. A more comprehensive 2 to 3 person team must do a nationwide workshop roadshows and visit these sites. Simple and pictorial sexual harassment. A code of conduct must be done. Entry-level code of conduct must be done that can be understood, coupled with, in my humble opinion, an online platform. Medium to long-term, stakeholders analysis and engagement process must be undertaken. Maybe this is maybe this forum today is the start of that. A collaborative and interactive rollout strategy must be developed. It is critical that sexual harassment needs to be linked to other gender abuse, as well as pregnancy and PPE. And I know PPE because I also did a research project on that for women PPE for Mine Health Safety Council about 3 years ago. A comprehensive code of conduct constitution should be considered as part of the monitoring and evaluation, encouraging sexual harassment ambassadors at each site. Constant updates and guidance to be sent to occupational health and safety, HR departments via email, WhatsApp, social media. A campaign that goes beyond the mine gates, as I mentioned earlier. I've just finished writing the Occupational Health Handbook 2020. And in chapter 19, I added a section on women in mining. It wasn't there previously. The previous Occupational Handbook was done in 2001. And guys, I think I might have made up some of the time there. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you so much for your talk. I enjoyed your video as well. Visuals are always a useful tool. And what you said about the the engagement of workshops, I definitely think that this workshop will encourage engagement, and then we can, it's the start of normalizing speaking up and saying no, and normalizing that we can talk about sexual harassment and not feel ashamed. Yeah.
Megan, I have to just tell you a quick story. I feel a little bit guilty. We've maybe not a missed opportunity, but when you sit with ladies and you get their confidence for them to open up and talk to you, they look you in the eye, hey? They look you in the eye and ask you to make a difference. And I feel disappointed in a way that nothing really came out of this as much as it should have done. I believe that we had an opportunity to create dialogue, to create platform, to create interconnectivity. We had one instance on one of the mines, which again shall remain nameless, where we had a whole room full of, in fact, it was a mix. I mentioned earlier on it was gender-based, but this occasion we had mixed of about 15 women and about 5 men. One of the ladies actually broke down in the focus group session. So we evacuated the whole room and we sat and spoke with her one-on-one for about 2 or 3 hours. It was amazing to hear her stories and her plight, and very, very upsetting. I mean, we probably drive to work on a Monday morning and moan about the traffic, or moan about the pollution, or moan about the litter, or moan about, we don't drive to work on Monday morning thinking that our lives could be in danger and we might not come home to feed our children that night. And I would hope out of this forum that we this is a serious subject. And, if we talk about budgets and budgets being made available, I mean, a budget should be made available. It's like the pandemic we had last year. A budget was made available for PPE. We have to make a budget available for this, for sexual harassment in the mines, especially on the coalface. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making me part of this great initiative. I thought my aim would be today of specifically this presentation, you know, to look at more practical guidelines or practical advice that you might find of value. So let's have a look at the 5 common types of sexual harassments. I don't want to stand still for too long on this. I think Gary gave us some devastating evidence on some of these things that are happening at the moment. If we look specifically at number 4 and number 5, those are the things that I thought, you know, let's just stand still for a moment and look into these situations, because we don't always feel comfortable to lodge a formal complaint. I mean, let's face it, you know, there are sometimes those sexual gestures or offensive jokes, and you don't really feel that, no, this is it, I'm going to lodge a complaint, even though we know that there are these procedures in place. And Marion also spoke about that. What is important is to admit the fact that these kind of situations so often leads to self-doubt. I think we end up in situations where we thought afterwards, what the hell just happened? You know, what was that all about? And we're doubting ourselves. We're asking ourselves, was I too friendly? You know, what just happened? What happened there? I recently had a client about a year ago, and it was a very strange situation. He came with his second session. He came to me and he started the session by saying, I just want to tell you, I am married. And that was it. And he completely threw me off. I thought the whole session, I couldn't actually concentrate. I was thinking, oh, was I too friendly? Why did he say this? And the worst part is I wasn't brave enough to ask him about that or to elaborate on this. And I think we can think of many examples like that, where we doubt ourselves. I love this quote. Never let a few bad days or bad experiences or bad people cause you to doubt yourself. None of these things define you. And we know this, but somehow we still don't believe this. So this leads me to circumstances beyond our control. We know there are a lot of circumstances beyond our control, and your previous speakers, all of them actually referred to that during this morning sessions. I want to give you one example of this. Recently, about 3 years ago, I was asked to speak at an audiology conference, and they said to me beforehand, you know what, we have a problem with the young audiologists where they feel extremely uncomfortable with the older people, especially older men, because it seems that they don't have, I want to call it filters anymore. They will make inappropriate remarks. They will, for instance, tell the young ladies, oh, you know, it's been years since a pretty lady like you sat so close to me, and you can move even closer. Please don't feel shy. You can touch me. Oh, I like that. Things like that. And yet this was a big problem because most of their customers were older people and they experience it on a regular basis. So I was quite interested in this and then did a bit of research, and it is apparent that there are some natural, or we can say there's a natural deterioration happening in the frontal lobe with older people. And when they speak about older people, it's actually as young as 65 and older, which is not that old. So this is definitely not an excuse not at all an excuse for bad or inappropriate behavior, but it just proves that, you know, in the normal aging process, it does lead to changes in the brain, and it has certain social consequences. And these changes often do not affect intelligence. So, you know, these are people, sometimes people are still working, they have their own businesses, they are professional, they are intelligent, but somehow they have less inhibitions, or they do not have filters anymore. Maybe you can all think of older people, even in your family, where you think, sure, what was that all about? They also did another research or experiment where they saw, it's quite interesting to see that some of these older people can't filter out irrelevant information anymore. They were able to focus on what was important, but they've also focused on irrelevant information, and that caused them to remember less well. So this is just one example of things that's happening around us that we have no control over this. So where does this lead us? And this is I think the biggest challenge is we should be brave enough to have those difficult conversations with colleagues and with clients. And we should set boundaries. And I know it's easier said than done, but there are a few things that we can focus on. And I would like to share that with you. But let's first stand still at these points. What should we know? We should be aware of potential triggers. And if I say triggers, you should ask yourself, do you have certain triggers? Are there things that you know, maybe you walk into a meeting, and if you just see a specific type of person or the way someone is speaking to you, it triggers you. In my home language, Afrikaans, you know, there are people that uses words like poppy or meisiekie or words like that. And these things also might be potential triggers for you as well. And then I think this whole morning we've spent a lot of time on talking about training. And I have to take my hat off for you for spending so much time on this and educating your staff and people. And then the last point on this slide is also something quite interesting. Keep an eye out for actions that just brush the line between okay and not okay and put a stop to them before they escalate. So those typical company after parties or team building sessions where you know where there's alcohol involved, make sure that you put a stop to them and that you are the one acting professional before they escalate. When we look at our colleagues or our clients, what do we know about them and what do they know about us? Now, Kingsley spoke this morning about the dimensions of difference and the complexity. There are so many factors that influence all of us. And here are a few. I mean, it's a very simple list. But usually we know when we look at our clients or colleagues, whether they're young or old, male or female, we know their names. We might know something about their background or their personalities. But what we don't know is who they really are, what mood they are in, what is going on in their minds. Maybe they are also vulnerable or feel fear. And we definitely don't always know what their expectations are. But we walk around in an environment in the workplace with colleagues who have a certain set of expectations. And we also have expectations. So what do they know about you? they might already have certain perception about you. For instance, whether you are a talker, whether you're a colleague that's always on time, or whether you're someone who doesn't waste time. They might have a perception whether they feel comfortable with you or at ease, or whether you're just there to get the job done. So our colleagues have these perceptions about us, but they don't always know, for instance, if we are adding value. You might think that they know this, but they're still figuring it out. They also don't know if they can trust you. They might not know how authentic you are. They might not know something about your integrity. And they definitely won't necessarily know what your expectations are. So, expectations. Where does expectations come from? Or where do they come from? I love this model, and I thought, you know, let me just share it with you. It says now 5 levels of personality, but if we forget for a moment about the fact that it says personality, if you look at this, at these circles, and you look at the inner circle, the values one, we all have core values. And you know what, your core values can be something like integrity, respect, balance, for instance. And out of those core values, you have certain beliefs. For instance, you believe that people should respect you. You believe that people should have integrity. And out of those beliefs, we have certain expectations. These expectations influence directly our attitudes and eventually our actions. But now the challenging part of this is that your colleagues, or in some cases clients, also have a certain set of values, core values, that sort of drive their actions at the end of the day. They have maybe a different set of expectations, which will influence their attitude and actions. Gary actually also briefly touched on that when he gave us some examples of those expectations of some of the colleagues in the mining industry. The other day, I saw someone who his core values, when we unpacked his core values, they were recognition, status, and success. It's quite far from where I am in terms of my values. So already I can see, sure, there might, if I had to work with this person, there might have been some conflict. Because we are, I almost want to say, on different planets. But you can think for yourself, if someone's core values are something like recognition or success, status, then different things or different aspects will drive someone like that. So what can we do? We now know that our expectations definitely has an influence on our attitude and eventually our actions. And there are so many differences. We all work in the same working environment, but we have different set of expectations. So the challenge is to speak about those expectations, to say it out loud, to ask people to share their expectations with you by asking, for instance, powerful questions. Something like, I would like to share with you my expectations, or what would be the ideal outcome for me today. That's a nice question that you can ask some of your colleagues. Or, for instance, can we talk about our expectations? I think it's very important to address this, and then also this question. I don't know what your intentions were, but I felt uncomfortable. And for the way forward, please avoid whatever it is. Maybe offensive jokes that you showed me, something like that. So I know this is not to say that if you have this kind of conversation with someone, that it will be a breeze. Definitely not. But I think by putting these things on the table and by starting dialogue, by starting conversations where we can discuss our expectations, we might get quite further in the workplace. We should focus on what we can change. You know, there's a lot of things that we can't change, but there are things that we can change. And part of this is we should not feel guilty, and you know, especially for being pleasant or nice or friendly, but focus on those things that you can actually change. And pick your fights, you know, choose to spend your energy wisely. I think we sometimes try so much to change people's behavior, but we forget that we have to start with ourselves, and we have to start with having proper conversations like the ones we're having today. But choose to spend your energy wisely. And then another vital aspect is to protect yourself. We spoke about speaking up today, but I think it's also important, if you know that there's someone that makes you feel uncomfortable and you have to go in a room or in a meeting room with that person, don't go alone. Ask someone to accompany you. I know it's not always very practical, especially in the mining industry, but if you know someone don't make you feel at ease, you can always ask for someone to accompany you. And then take time to reflect on your own feelings and demonstrate respect. You won't always know what the person's intentions were, but you can have those difficult conversations. You can be brave enough to speak about expectations and find out what the expectations of your colleagues are. Things do not change, we change. I think if we look at something like the Me Too movement, it's quite apparent that a lot of things in the workplace hasn't changed. We wish it did, but it hasn't. But we are changing, and we are finally speaking about these things. We are addressing the elephant in the room, and I want to celebrate that and say, I think we've come a long way as women or minority groups, that we are empowering ourselves. And when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you respond to what's happening. That is where your true power is. And that's it from my side. I don't know if you have any questions.
Matty, thanks so much. That was, okay, I have an echo. That was just phenomenal. Thank you. I truly enjoyed it. If you have a look at the chat, there are lots and lots of comments. But if anybody has a question, do you want to just jump in and ask your questions? Are you going to make me read the questions? Camille, come on.
Oh, and mine wasn't really a question, was it?
No, but I just need somebody else to talk a little bit.
Well, you know, I can just comment on what I have put in the comments there. You know, for me, I have certain boundaries that I have developed over the years from my own personal experiences. Each of us have our own personal boundaries. So, for example, Megan in the comments says that when someone calls her girl, she's offended. And rightfully so. She and her personal experiences have resulted in her being offended by being called girl. Where for someone else, for interest's sake, say myself, someone calls me a girl, I will not necessarily be offended. I'd find it as a joke and laugh. It's not to say that when someone called Megan a girl, she's being too touchy. No, she is offended by that. You offended her. You were a perpetrator. Not to try, it is a very small thing. But at the end of the day, ensuring that the people around us and the people we work directly with understand or have a better understanding of what our boundaries are and when they start to trigger us. Because each of us do that. Whenever we start to become more comfortable with someone, you start to push boundaries to see, because we want to understand where each of our boundaries are, because it makes for a transparent relationship. And some people push really, really hard initially, like men flirting with us at the mines or something. Like that's too hard. But in order for each of us to live harmoniously together, we need to understand that. Understand, okay, that person I can play flirtatiously with because we've established our boundaries. But yeah, so walking into somewhere new and someone says a joke that offends you, you go to them and say, look, what you said is a bit offensive to me and therefore could be offensive to someone else. So I'm sharing this with you to educate you so that next time you do walk into a room with strangers, think before you say that specific joke. So yeah, communication really is the key. And one of my comments, so just to finish off, that some people, I myself, I'm very forward, I'll tell someone straight when they've offended me. But others are sort of insecure and are still trying to understand their own boundaries. So they can't directly tell someone, this is my boundary, because they're still understanding it. Oh, what he did actually makes me feel uncomfortable. That person at that stage can't go to that offender and tell them, look, what you said offended me, because they're still not unsure. They're still unsure. Having a department like HR or someone who is trained in dealing with these situations is vitally important, because there are some people that don't currently at that moment have the courage to approach those people. And the people that are trained, psychologically trained, in order to address these issues are the better person to go to. Because I have, in some instances, told someone straight what they did offended me. And it was so rude that I offended them. So it was just a badly managed situation. And having someone who is trained to manage those situations is vitally important. So that's why I just want to close that off. Sorry for the long talk.
Thanks, Camille. Are there any other comments or questions before we move to our next speaker?
Yes, just on that one,
Sure,
Camille.
there is.
Maria, go.
Thank you. Just on that one, Camille, I tend to be a bit on the man itself as well, but straightforward. But then again, if somebody else is feeling comfortable to put you in that position, then I'm sorry, then you don't get to put me in a place where I need to go, oh, sorry, But I do understand that a lot of times, especially younger people coming into the mining industry, be it male or female, it does get difficult to raise your voice because you're also not quite sure where you are in a career position. And I think it's always important to, in baby steps, if you can, just put down your foot and open your mouth, find your voice and say, this is my boundary. Even if you're not quite sure where you're at yet, if it nags in the back of your head and you say, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this, it's probably because down inside you're not comfortable with it, but your mother said to you, don't be rude. But be rude, it's fine. That's my bit.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What an insightful morning. It's been so great to be part of this, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Okay, so I just quickly want to run through what I'll be talking about. So we'll start off with the truth about a sexual harasser profile, and then we'll look at, knowing this truth, how can I prepare and equip myself, okay, against a sexual harasser. We're also going to look at how to identify victims of sexual harassment and then how to assist them, effectively as a colleague. we're going to do a quick recap and then hopefully there's time for questions. I'm going to try not to rush too much, but I am sensitive to the time limit. Okay. Okay, so the truth about the harasser profile. So as a little bit of an exercise, I would like you guys to, just for a second, think of what do you think an harasser profile look like? So you can either write down a few characteristics or just what you see, or just think about them. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about that, and then we're going to compare what you think to the actual profile. So quickly do that. Okay, hopefully you're ready, quick thinkers. So let's see. What a shocker, okay? There's no actual profile, okay, of an harasser. And I see someone on the comments also mentioned that anyone can be an harasser, right? Let's just let that sink in for a minute, okay? Anyone can be an harasser. As scientists and professionals, and especially as psychologists, we like lists. That's why we want to know, what does a profile look like? Okay, we like lists. We want to be able to measure something, solve the problem, be prepared. But unfortunately, psychology, and especially offender behavior, is way more complicated than that. And the truth of the matter is that anyone, like I said, can be an harasser, right? Any rank, any gender, any race, any age, at any time. And that's quite scary, okay? That may make some of us feel a little bit vulnerable. And it's true, we need to be vigilant, okay? So what now? Okay, we know that we have no idea how to know when somebody is going to be a sexual harasser. So how do we prepare? How do we equip ourselves? And before we start talking about that, I just want to share a quick little video. I have to warn you guys that the video does contain a snake. So if you are really scared of snakes, please maybe close your eyes. But let's most of it just look at it and we'll chat about it afterwards. Okay. Scary stuff, right? Okay, so your question might be, if we're talking about sexual harassment, why on earth would I put you through something like this or show you a video like this? Okay, I want us to understand that before we can look even at how do we react to sexual harassment, okay, we need to understand our body's reaction to traumatic events, or like this, a surprise. Okay, because we're going to have the same physical reaction when we are confronted in a situation where someone is saying something inappropriate. They're making us feel vulnerable. They're making us feel threatened. Then we're going to have these basic reactions. We're going to have our fight, flight, and freeze responses, which most of you probably have heard of before. So why this is problematic is when we go into these responses, our brain actually moves from our rational thinking frontal lobe to our more primal responses. Okay, so when we have these responses, it's not well thought out, and sometimes it's not even appropriate for the situation, and it could get us into more trouble within a sexual harassment scenario. So the problem with these as well is that sexual harassment normally happens in a sphere where we already feel vulnerable. We already feel like victims. And what I've seen in practice is that most individuals actually then freeze instead of act. And Marty spoke about the fact that, you know, the behavior of an offender, of an harasser, escalates. Okay, it's an escalating type of behavior. So we need to stop that behavior when it starts with that verbal comment, that whistle, that inappropriate joke, that's when we have to stop the behavior. And we had a nice discussion. You guys had a really nice discussion about what are the types of questions that we can ask, or even the things that we can say to harassers and how to go about that. And that's really something that we need to focus on and understand, that we can do those things instead of freezing or instead of going into that fight or flight. All right, so I see I haven't started my video, so I'll just start my video for those of you who want to see me. Hi. Okay, so how do we counter this fight or flight or freeze response that we have? Okay, so the very first thing we need to do, and it's also been touched on today, is understand what are your values? What do you stand for? What are your boundaries? We can't decide that in a situation, a sexual harassment situation. These are the things we need to decide on, and we need to be very clear and understand ourselves before we even ever engage in a situation like that. That's very important. Like I mentioned then, is we need to be able to voice them. Okay, and we've already said that it's harder, it's easier said than done, and I'll chat to you about how we can maybe practice that. And we need to enforce these boundaries. Okay, so nipping that behavior in the bud is crucial. Then we don't have to be rude. I think that's something I want to say as a fellow women in the field, and I know it's not only women that are victims of sexual harassment, is that sometimes we feel that we need to be less feminine, we need to be less like ourselves, and that's just not true. We don't have to be rude. We can just be assertive. That's really, really important. Okay. Then the way that we can prepare ourselves or equip ourselves before we're in a situation like this is by a role play. So either role playing with yourself in the mirror or with a trusted friend to say, listen, these are the type of situations I've heard of or I've encountered. Let's role play different questions or discuss it in a group. How can we react differently, or how can we react to minimize these type of behaviors? Then the next one that is very important is to trust your gut. Okay, so some of us have been taught that your gut is just this fluffy, airy-fairy thing, that it cannot be trusted, it's not reliable, and that is actually not true at all. So our gut, or our feelings it's connected to your nervous system, it's connected to your brain, and psychological studies have actually shown that our unconscious mind or brain actually has an uncanny ability to accurately discern character and potentially intentions. Okay, how this works is a talk for another day. It's quite complicated, but it's true. Okay, so your gut has the ability to give you a red flag warning before your rational mind can get there. Okay, that's crazy to imagine. Okay, and that's why I love psychology. So it's so important for us as individuals to trust our gut. I'm quite a fan of criminal podcasts and stories, and there's this one crime podcast, Crime Junkie, and they've done hundreds and hundreds of stories about different victims of abuse and any types of crime. And one of their life rules is to always trust your gut. And the reason for that is the surviving victims always say that I felt uncomfortable, but I just ignored it, or I thought I was just being a girl, or I thought I was just being oversensitive. And if they trusted their gut, they probably wouldn't have been a victim. So trust your gut. Okay. On that point, the sad truth of living in a country like South Africa or any country is that you might have already been a victim of sexual harassment or abuse. And what that does, trauma like that, is it actually silences our inner voice, that inner gut. And I want to encourage you today, whether you've been a victim or you've just silenced your voice because of other reasons, listen to your gut, trust your instincts, and listen to the voice. Start trusting those red flags again. Right, so then the last one is to reflect. Okay, so Marty also spoke about possible triggers. I think it was her that spoke about possible triggers that we might have. So remember that sexual harassment is about unwanted, first of all, and inappropriate sexual attention. Okay, so when you walk in someone just tells you you're wearing a really nice dress, they might just mean that you're wearing a really nice dress. All of us know that sometimes we look really good in a really nice dress. So it's very important to reflect, why am I feeling these emotions? Okay, is it a trigger? Is it an actual event? If we are unsure about whether this constitutes sexual harassment or not, I just felt uncomfortable, reflect inwardly and also with a trusted individual, and do that on a regular basis. Okay, so how do we prepare ourselves? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, we trust our guts, okay? We regularly practice self-reflection, understanding ourselves, and also doing that with a trustworthy party. And we protect ourselves by developing our own boundaries and practicing how to enforce and voice these boundaries in a healthy manner. Okay, so we're going to move on to the victim. Okay, so victims of sexual harassment. Who is most likely to be a victim? Okay, so like the previous little exercise, I'm going to ask you to think about it for a few seconds. And what do you think are characteristics of victims? And what does it look like? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that. You can either write it on the comments or just write it down on a piece of paper, or just think about it. Okay, so hopefully I gave you enough time. Don't want to waste too much time, but the reality, just as it is with the profile of the harasser, is that anyone can be a victim of sexual harassment. In South Africa, we live with the scary statistics that 1 in every 3 women will probably be sexually abused in their life. A recent study in the mining industry in Australia found that more than 40% of mining professionals will be sexually harassed in their career. Okay, that's more than half. That's almost half of us. I mean, and the fact is that women are twice as likely to be victims. So, who's most likely to be a victim? It could be any of us. However, there is hope. We are not hopeless, okay? But the person that is most likely to be a victim, right, is the one who is ill-prepared. And that's why it's so important to understand your own boundaries, understand how to act. And that's why conferences or sessions like today is so important. We need to understand what our rights is, what's the process is, how can we be prepared, and how can we stop this from happening to us and to other people in the future? Okay. Then just something very important I want to say about the victim as well is that please remember that when you are a victim of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, is that the behavior is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of the characteristics. I want to reiterate this, the characteristics of the offender, okay? Marty said it and I said it earlier, it's not you that's too friendly or too nice or too kind, okay? No, we can stay ladies. We can be loving and kind and caring and assertive, and we don't have to be victims. And remember, do not fall into that place of self-blame. All right. So knowing that anyone can be a victim, okay, and that 40% of people in the mining industry might be victims of sexual harassment, we need to equip ourselves as well, not only to understand that anyone can be and be prepared for that, but we also need to equip ourselves to identify people that have been sexually harassed that maybe are scared of speaking up. Okay, so unfortunately, in terms of sexual harassment, there's no specific behavior that is connected to the victims of sexual harassment. So we will look at the general characteristics of someone who's experienced trauma, okay? Because sexual harassment has actually been linked to trauma responses or post-traumatic stress responses. So things that we will see or behavior that we might see in someone who's been a victim of sexual harassment is depression, anxiety, withdrawal, even emotional outbursts, okay, due to the fact that they can't cope. Mostly they're going to feel a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. They're going to be super embarrassed. So it's very difficult to say, this is a list, look for these things, okay? So the general rule in psychology or in counseling is to say, do I see a noticeable change in someone's behavior, okay? Mostly, obviously, a negative change. So is someone more withdrawn? Are they more prone to outbursts? Are they do they seem more depressed, more sad than they normally do? And this is normally an indication that something is going on with that individual. And that is a great opportunity that you can take to go and say, hey, what's happening? Let's talk about it. Creating that safe space for them to chat. And it was also mentioned in one of the videos that we watched today, is to creating that environment for people to actually be able to talk about it. So I'm going to give you some practical tips as well, is how can we've now identified the victim. How do we assist them practically as a colleague, not as a psychologist or a professional, but as a colleague? How can we support everyone? Okay, so how do we assist victims? Very important. We listen, okay? Create a space, I can't say it enough. Create a space where they can talk. Okay? Talking about it is the biggest first step. Then, secondly, do not be dismissive in your comments, okay? Don't say things like, are you sure that's what happened? Or, oh, I don't know. Listen first, okay? Let them get their story out. We can check the facts afterwards. We can make sure that it's, not maybe just a trigger, that it is actually unwanted, inappropriate behavior. We can do that afterwards. Let's listen to them, okay? And not be dismissive. Second of all, is that you can reassure them. Okay, so reassure them that their feelings are valid. They're allowed to feel violated, even though nobody touched them. They're allowed to feel hurt and betrayed, even though it was just something someone said. Let them feel those emotions. Reassure them that it's a safe place to talk about it. Always take any sexual harassment claim very seriously. Some of the videos and also through the discussions we've spoken about, men maybe not being taken seriously when they come forward with sexual harassment claims. It's similar to women. Take it seriously. As a colleague, as a friend, take it seriously. Then, very important, I know we've had so many discussions today about policies, procedures, what are your rights, what is the law, how can we engage, when do we go to HR? And those things are great to have, okay? But we know that these processes are not always perfect. And we cannot force a victim to disclose what has happened to them. Okay, that's not for us to decide. We can encourage them if we want to, but we cannot force them. And it's very important to note that disclosing something like sexual harassment is a very emotional and somewhat traumatic experience. So this person really needs to be referred to someone who can walk that road of disclosure with them, okay? Preferably a professional or trained individual. The reason why people don't disclose is because, first of all, they might not have the emotional capacity to deal with that. They feel like the previous speaker mentioned, that's secondary trauma. So they feel that they don't want to expose themselves to that, and they might be exposed to more bullying. And that's okay. So it's their choice. Okay, so let's not force that upon them if they are not emotionally capable of doing that right now. Then, like we mentioned earlier, in terms of preparing ourselves, if you have a friend or a colleague that's been through it and they have to work with this person again, because it's not like we can just leave or quit our jobs. We don't really want to do that. Role play possible reactions, possible things that they can say, the sentences you spoke about earlier, write those down, keep them somewhere, remember them, and equip other people as well to react appropriately to behavior. And then also something that I want to say is, if it's at all possible, buddy up. That's, I think in the mining industry, when you go down and you work in teams, even if it's a male and a female, that buddy up, have each other's backs. Try to not feel and be alone. It's not always possible, but that's a really good way. Then the last thing here is how we assist victims is please refer them to a qualified professional. So while it is very natural for us to feel violated, betrayed, and hurt, when you see that a colleague or a friend or someone that you know is expressing high emotions, they're really struggling to cope, it's really, really deeply affecting their mental health, do not try and be their counselor, refer them to someone professional and let them get the help they need to heal from sexual harassment. So keeping those things in mind, the most important thing that we can do, and I cannot reiterate this enough, as colleagues, is to listen, to support, to create that safe space. And a specialist in the field of creating the safe space and listening with empathy is someone called Bernai Brown. This video clip that I'm going to show you is available on the internet. You can look at it again, make sure that you understand these skills and these things that she talks about in the video. It's a short clip, it's 2 minutes. Watch it and really try and take in the skills that she's teaching you about how to be an empathetic listener.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, hey, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you did. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, that's quite powerful and something really to remember, not only in the workplace when supporting others, but even in our personal lives. So I just want to recap what I've spoken about today. The first thing is, remember, anyone can be a sexual harasser and anyone can be a victim. But it's important to know that we can better prepare ourselves to manage these situations. Something that I cannot reiterate enough, and this is not only in this situation, but throughout life, is trust your gut. Trust your gut. Sometimes your gut knows more than your analytical brain does. Like I said, we can prepare, act, and influence our working environments. And I think it's evidenced through everything that we've seen here today in terms of how do we enforce policies, company culture, the way that we choose to act can change the future. I would really like to live in a world where I can send my daughter or my son into the workplace one day and not have to worry about them also being victims of sexual harassment. To identify victims, it's important to look for changes in behavior. Actively look at your colleagues, build those relationships and look for those changes so that we can support and we can refer, because it's a lonely place to be a victim if you haven't spoken up. Then also the best way to support a victim is by listening with empathy, like we saw in this video clip. It's difficult not to give advice, it's difficult not to judge, but really to let the victim live their reality and share the reality in order for them to better get a grip on it and manage it, for them to be safe and get to a point of being healthy and dealing with trauma. Thank you, that's all from me. Is there any questions from anyone?
I do know the drill and I don't have a presentation, so it's just me that you get to look at. Thanks, Nolene.
That's fantastic. Please go right ahead.
Thank you. So I want to start out by saying that I'm not an expert in sexual harassment. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor. I'm not even aware of having ever been harassed sexually in my life or my career. And so when I was asked to talk today, I really struggled to figure out what I was going to say in the session, and what I could bring of value. But to leverage on what Christine was saying earlier, one of the things that I know to be very true is that we have different centers of intelligence within us, not just the brain in our head. We have intelligences in our gut and we have intelligence in our heart. And when we can communicate with those intelligences and integrate them and listen to them, we are able to cope with the world in a much more functional and cohesive way, and in a way that allows us to bring compassion, curiosity, creativity and courage into the way that we deal with the world that we live in, which is a very chaotic world and sometimes a very hard world to live in. And so I want to go back to saying I'm not an expert in sexual harassment, but I'm most definitely an expert in emotions like shame and fear and vulnerability. And as I'm going through this list, if you want to react to any of these emotions and these feelings, by all means do, because I think all of us have experienced these emotions of shrinking back from things when we feel shameful, when we feel fear, of playing small, of avoiding, of anxiety and depression, of avoiding difficult conversations, of not feeling courageous, of not wanting to show up, of struggling to say no, of having boundaries and knowing how to uphold our values when life gets difficult, of needing to people please to keep things comfortable, of feeling responsible for things that we're not actually responsible for having a very loud inner critic who's constantly saying, you're the one who's at fault here, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have worn that, you shouldn't have said that, you shouldn't have smiled like that, you shouldn't have been quite so entertaining and friendly. And of having stories that circle around in our heads, in my head, that very often when I'm not feeling safe, when I'm not feeling courageous, hold me back from fully being myself. And I think these are feelings and emotions that are very common for anybody who's experienced sexual harassment, whether it's a comment, innocent or not, about looking nice in a particular dress, all the way through to something that could be quite invasive and hugely traumatic physically. And what I'm also an expert in is coping. And I think a lot of people who have experienced sexual harassment have to cope. They have to continue with their lives no matter what's happened to them or what experiences they've had. And so they find coping mechanisms to get through life. And those coping mechanisms, much like mine, are not necessarily healthy coping mechanisms. They are often incredibly unconscious coping mechanisms that have been patterned based on what we learn to be appropriate to get through life, whether it's appropriate or not. And so a lot of us go through our lives unconsciously. And earlier, Christine talked about developing preparation skills. And those preparation skills require you to get conscious. They require you to reflect on your values, on your boundaries, on what you will and won't tolerate, and on consciously being able to say, yes, no, stop, go away, help, I'm in trouble, somebody, I need help. And so often we go through life very unconsciously, because if we were conscious all the time, we would be exhausted by 9 o'clock in the morning. We make, on average, 35,000 decisions every single day. The large majority of those decisions are unconscious. But the problem with that is that we end up patterning ourselves and doing the majority of what we do unconsciously, including how we react to situations. So when I say that I'm not an expert in sexual harassment and that I'm not aware of having ever been sexually harassed, I've also spent a lot of my life being unconscious and coping with the world by suppressing my consciousness. And I think a lot of us do that. My choice of coping for much of my life has been food. For some people, it's drink, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's sex, it's gambling, it's working, it's sleeping, it's avoiding behaviors, it's whatever it is. But we all have different coping mechanisms. And in thinking about this topic and in thinking about many very conscious changes I've made over the last 18 months, I've realized that I've had to become very conscious and make very clear choices. And that's really what I want to talk about as a technique to cope courageously, compassionately, and creatively when it comes to the negative emotions associated with sexual harassment. What I want to talk about is getting conscious and making choices, taking responsibility. In other words, being able to choose the response that we have. Because most of us, when we are in an unconscious state, are unable to make that choice. And it again links back to what Christine was saying about the fight, flight, and freeze mode that we get into. And so I want to talk to you about the autonomic nervous system, which maybe elaborates a bit on what Christine was saying. We all have an autonomic nervous system. In fact, we have 2 different nervous systems. But the autonomic nervous system is the one that affects the way our brain operates, the quality of the decisions that we make, the way that we access the 3 different intelligences that I mentioned earlier, our head brain, our heart, and our gut, our intuition, and our ability to tap into that intuition and make decisions that are based on our gut feeling and our values and not just on cerebral thought processes. Our autonomic nervous system controls our involuntary and our visceral functions. So it controls our cardio responses, our respiratory responses. It controls our stress responses, our fight, flight, and freeze response. And it happens in nanoseconds. It happens way faster than we can cognitively and rationally figure out what's going on. it's largely outside of our conscious control. And so when we act unconsciously, we're acting on an automated pattern. We are not in control. We are not being responsible for our responses, for our choices. And our autonomic nervous system has two parts to it. When those two parts are in balance, we can make good integrated decisions. We can make wise choices for ourselves. We can tap into and communicate with our head, heart, and our gut in an integrated way, where we can listen to those intelligences and do what's right for us. But when we are out of balance, when we are either in sympathetic mode, which is fight, flight, or freeze response, or we are in parasympathetic mode, which is rest and repose, so more depressive response, we're unable to make good choices. And each of those states is necessary in response to a certain moment in time. But a lot of us have learned to stay in one or other of those states, or to be metastable, so to seesaw between those states. Sometimes to be in fight and flight, and then immediately shift into a more depressed state. Staying in balance is where we are optimal, where we make the best decisions, and where we are able to be conscious and choose our responses, choose how we want to experience our world, choose how we want to think, and how that influences our feelings and our actions. And so the technique that I want to talk about is breathing. And it sounds incredibly simple, but breathing gets our autonomic nervous system back into balance. And I just want you to think for a moment how you're breathing right now. I know that as I've been talking, I'm feeling a little bit nervous, and I can feel that my breathing has become very shallow. I can feel that my breathing is very much in my upper kind of chest area, and that not a lot of my breathing is going down into my gut. And I can feel that my heart rate is a little bit faster than normal, and that I'm actually speaking quite high up from my voice box and not deeper from my gut, okay? And if you think about how you're breathing right now and how you breathe as a normal stage, is it a shallow breath? Are you conscious about breathing? Do you forget to breathe? When you are feeling traumatized, what does your breathing do? And how do you consciously react to things? Are you conscious when you react, or do you jump straight into a patterned reaction? So breathing buys us the ability to break that patterned response and to just give ourselves a moment to move out of fight, flight, or freeze, or out of depressive mode and into a more rational and cognitive and intuitive mode. Helps us get into balance. And you'll find that if you are in a sympathetic mode, so fight, flight, or freeze, you're probably breathing quite fast, but shallowly. If you are in a parasympathetic mode, so more depressive, rest and repose state, you're probably breathing shallowly and slowly, okay? What we want to do is get your breathing into kind of a sine curve. So most of you are technical and you would probably understand a sine curve better than I do, but it's a nice balanced sine wave where you breathe in through your nose for the count of 6 and out through your mouth for the count of 6. And if you repeat that 5 or 6 times, a minute or 2, it brings your autonomic nervous system into balance. And when you pull your autonomic nervous system into balance, you can start reacting, or rather responding, through your own choice, rather than reacting unconsciously. So what I want to do in the next 2 or 3 minutes that we've got together is invite you to join me in a breathing exercise. Very simple exercise. And if you're comfortable with this, all I'm going to ask you to do is sit up fairly straight in your chair or stand wherever you are, or even lie down if you want to lie down. Put your feet flat on the floor if you're standing or sitting. And if you can take your shoes off, that's even better. So kind of really get your feet into the ground. Relax your shoulders. Close your eyes. And then breathe with me. We're going to breathe in through the nose for the count of 4 or 6, and out through the mouth for a count of 4 or 6. And you can count in your head. I will count for the first few. And then I just want to ask you to keep breathing in and out. If you want to breathe out with an audible sigh, it can be quite a relaxing way to breathe. But most importantly, to breathe deep into your diaphragm, so into your stomach. This is not a shallow kind of high breath. This is a deep breath into your stomach. And as you're breathing, I want you to really just focus on what you feel inside you. Focus on where you feel it inside you, whether there's a particular quality to what you feel. And if you start to feel like your heart rate and your muscles and your breathing start to become more expansive and relaxing. So if you're comfortable, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes now, and we'll breathe for a minute. So breathe in through your nose, 2, 3, 4, and out through your mouth, 2, 3, 4. And in through your nose, and out through your mouth. And in through your nose. And out through your mouth. And in. And out. And in. And out. And I'm going to leave you to breathe at your own pace. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And as you're breathing, I want you to ask yourself, what does your heart truly connect with in this moment? And then I want you to think, what meaning does your head make of that connection? And I invite you to come back and ask your heart what it truly desires in this moment. And then I want to bring you down to your gut and ask you what it courageously wants to take action on. And then come back to your heart and ask your heart what it compassionately wants to offer in taking action. And finally, as you take your last few breaths in and out, you ask your head, how it can creatively help you to be courageous and compassionate in coping with whatever emotions you're feeling right now. When you're ready, you can stop the breathing technique. This is a technique I use in my day, every day at the beginning of the day. I use it with many of my clients when they are either showing up in our sessions very anxiously or very depressively. And almost without fail, every single one of my clients has said that it helps to calm them down, center them, and help them start to think and be conscious and make wiser decisions for themselves. And I think one of the things that happens for anybody who's been a victim of sexual harassment is that we get very caught in coping unconsciously and not being able to consciously take responsibility for our lives. And this is a very simple technique, and it's one that I advocate using on a daily basis for 2 or 3 minutes in your normal life, whether anything has happened to you or nothing has happened to you. It's just a way of getting centered and getting clear on how you want to manage your day. And I think if somebody has ever been a victim of sexual harassment or a victim of any other trauma, it becomes an incredibly useful, very quick technique to just help center yourself, get yourself into balance, and then make a choice around how you want to respond to your life, to your day, and what actions you want to take. So that's what I have to offer. It may be quite an esoteric thing to have presented today. It's certainly quite different to what I normally talk about. But I've really chosen to talk about that because it's something that I've found very useful over the last 18 months in making my own very conscious choices, in getting out of a state of being unconscious and reacting to the world, and starting to make very clear choices for myself on how I want to show up every day. And for the clients that I've worked with who have been victims of sexual harassment, as big or as small as the harassment has been for them on an individual level, it's helping some of them to show up in a different quality and in a way that is more in tune with who they want to be and how they want to be experienced in the world, more in control of themselves and less reactive to external experiences. So I hope that's useful. I want to thank you for the platform, and that's the end of my talk.
Bernai, thanks so much for that. I think we're all too inclined to look to the outside for solutions. But you've just showed us that if we just look to the inside, it's all there as well. Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions or comments for Bernai? I'm now going to hand back to Megan, who is going to run the panel discussion. So Megan, this is now all yours. Thank you.
Okay. Hello again, everyone. Hi, Bernai. It's good seeing you again.
Nice to see you.
So I really enjoyed your talk, and the vagus nerve has been activated on my end. I'd like to invite all the speakers that are still online to join in on the panel discussion. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand on the little tab. I can't see where to do it because I'm like this chat's admin. But raise your hand or switch on your microphone and ask all the questions you want to ask. And if you aren't going to ask a question soon, I'm going to share with you the statistics that I have obtained from our online survey thus far. A reminder that it's open to men as well, not just women. And also, it's open to anyone who identifies, you know, anything other than anyone else other than a male or a female. So we don't discriminate against your sexuality or your sexual orientation or your gender identity. Please participate. If you have been a victim of harassment, if you've helped a victim of harassment, if you've been found not guilty of sexual harassment accusations, you know, this is a platform to be heard, because in essence, if you've been falsely accused, maybe you didn't know you were doing something wrong. But if you weren't doing anything wrong, you know, you are a victim of being falsely accused. So please, please, please participate in the survey. So I'll give you some stats from what we've already obtained. Okay. So for the people who've already participated in the survey, you'll know that you don't need to answer every question. If you feel uncomfortable, you can leave the question blank or move on or exit the survey. So not all of it, not all of the questions have been fully answered. But the demographic for this survey so far is 69% female and 31% male. Where the people work, 15.4% work on surface, 3.8% work underground, 26.92% work in consulting, contracting, or as a service provider, 11.5% are in office or corporate, 3.8% are in processing or of plants or labs, and then 15.4% is in exploration, and then 23% in others. So it's quite interesting. You know, if you'd like to, if you haven't done the survey yet, you can also answer the question to where you were working at the time. For instance, let's say I was harassed while I was working in exploration, but now I'm in service providing. So answer it any way you feel fit. But it's interesting. So the most harassment occurs either in other or consulting, contracting, or service provider. And then there was a question if we work in South Africa mainly or in other countries. 92% of the answers of where the participants work are in South Africa only, and other African countries. Only 8% of participants were working in countries other than South Africa at the time. So, I mean, it makes sense that most participants find themselves in Africa or South Africa because it's, I mean, it's the GSSA. So 30% of the participants helped a victim and 38.5% were a victim. Of those stats, 23% said it happened once, 3.8% said it's ongoing, and then 46% said that, you know, it happened multiple times, different occasions, different environments. So for instance, like it would have happened when I worked at that company or that company or that company. So 46% multiple occurrences. Age ranges, 46% of people experience this in their 20s, 19%, okay, wait, then 34% experience it in their 30s, and only 7.7% experience in their 40s plus. And then there's a combo of having experienced it in their 20s and 30s, and that's 19%. So I think it's safe to say that, like, the younger you are, the more, according to this survey and the participants, the more likely it is that you would have been sexually harassed or involved in something like that. So 69% did not leave the industry, while 7.6% did leave the industry. There's been an equal split of how you helped, or how you got helped, who helped you. So there's me, myself, and I. My colleague helped me. My friend helped me, my superior helped me, and other. So for me, myself, and I, my friend, my superior, there was an equal split of 11.5%. Then only 7% said my colleague helped me. And then in other, there was a 23%. And then like a lot of the questions became open-ended with a lot of different answers. But yeah, so I can say it's a split between helping myself / friend / superior. So then there was a difficult question, and Kingsley and Gary and Nolene know about this, but it was difficult to word this question because we want to include people who have been found not guilty of sexual harassment. In other words, they've been accused of it, but they were found not guilty, you know, irrelevant of whether if they were actually guilty or not guilty. But there was only one, okay, so let me just rephrase the question. If found not guilty, did you feel that the processes and policies followed were fair? One person said that it was fair, and the general feeling from the rest was that it wasn't fair. Back in the day, management didn't care because whoever was on the panel reviewing this was male. So one person said that the policies are fair if you have, you know, having been accused but found not guilty. And I'm happy to elaborate on that later on. So 42% felt that they did not miss out on promotions, contract renewals, etc. 19% of the people felt that they have missed out on promotions and pay raises and opportunities to work on new projects. And then there was an interesting one, and it's actually a question that I liked to, that I wanted to have there specifically because, okay, so the question was, have you ever been falsely accused of granting sexual favors for promotion? You know, so for instance, someone would say, oh, she must be sleeping with him or he must be sleeping with her. That's the reason behind their promotion or their, you know, why they excel in their workplace. So 23% of the participants have said that they have been falsely accused of granting sexual favors in order to excel in the workplace. And 16% of them are male and 83% of them are female. And then at the end, there was a general feeling of, okay, so the question was, is there any advice to give out to other people? And it kind of ties in quite accurately with all the talks of today. So there is consensus, there just needs to be more action. It's to speak up, just speak up. And in my opinion, we should encourage each other to normalize speaking up about it, you know, get the conversation going. But like Christine says, is don't be rude. You can do it politely and assertively. And, you know, there could be like a passive movement, yet active. So I would like more people to participate in the survey, please. So it's open for another 3 weeks.
Perhaps we should give our speakers an opportunity, one at a time, to comment on the survey and what's come out of it so far, or just a general comment on what you have taken out of the day. Shall we go in order? So we'll, okay, we can start with Kingsley. If he's still here. Oh, there we go.
I'm still here. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Hang on, I'll get on video as well. Okay. Right. Can you see me okay? Hear me? See me? Okay. I feel that this is a really brave day today where you've put what are some of the unspoken into the table. I've probably taken away more than I've given. So I feel a bit guilty about that. But what I was really pleased about is the way that each of the speakers dovetailed into each other. And there's food for thought. The one word that I take away from today is courage. That how do you help somebody with the courage to take this further if they've been harassed? And to do that well, you have to put in place systems and processes throughout an organization where people are listened to and believed and trusted. And then we move to the next stage. You can't expect people to do this on their own. There's got to be a collective, either through a system, a process, or a group of people. And that's why the ally scheme works very, very well. That even in some organizations where you may not have a big HR department, and we need to stop putting the onus on HR to sort this out. I think leadership needs to sort it out as well. But if you've got allies, then you're much stronger. It's when you're alone that it's harder. So that's the takeaway for me. And I really like the breath work as well. So that was very important. Thank you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nolene.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kingsley. Megan?
Oh, yes, I was just going to go to the next speaker.
That's great.
Okay. Which was?
It was Claire.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've got 100 tabs open.
And the reason I remember that is because it's my two previous companies' HR directors. Claire, are you here? No, she seems to have left already. So we'll move on to Marion if she's here. Also left. Okay, let's try the next one. Gary, are you still here? You are.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
So the question is from the survey results, what do you take out of that, or alternatively of the day?
So Nolene, you'll recall that I've had a couple of challenges with my time today. So I'm one of the naughty ones that didn't participate in the survey. Megan, apologies. But what I take out of today is I think we have an incredible opportunity to make a difference here. In my view, when we completed this project 3-4 years ago, and we presented the various scenarios, conclusions, recommendations, I believed, and I still believe, it wasn't taken seriously. And it worries me that an RFP should be administered when it really struck me from looking at it back at it now as a tick box scenario. The stories I have from the sexual harassment program, as well as the PPE program as well, compounds the whole issue that we've been speaking about. So I think, colleagues, we need to be brave. We need to, you know, I worry that GBV is not taken seriously in this country. There seems to be a lot of projects, a lot of movement, a lot of, I think there was one, the president's platform that was formed recently. What actually is it going to achieve? You know, it's an absolute scourge. And by not doing anything, we then become complicit in the whole process. I spoke to you earlier when we were interviewing people of the look of fear in people's eyes, and the belief, and I believe then that we're in a position to make a difference. The fact of the matter is, the beautiful video that we produced hasn't been used as widely as it should have been. It should have been an anchor to throw out all types of messages of awareness, workshops, programs, online platforms, you name it. The fact of the matter was, it was really just used to be shown at DMR then offices and union offices. It didn't go into the areas that we suggested it should have gone into. Those areas around the mine, in the mine, especially. So my message to the group was, let us all be brave and take this message, take the collective knowledge that we've gathered today and trailblaze this process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks so much for that. Right, we'll move on to our next speaker, Marty. Do you want to share what you gained from today?
Thank you once again for making me part of these conversations. If I look at my notes quickly, you know, Kingsley spoke about the complexity and the fact that there are these dimensions of difference, and we build a culture around these dimensions that define us. And I think in South Africa, it is so true that we do build a culture around dimensions that define us. And Claire also spoke about the fact that we should have an integrated approach. Marian spoke about gender dialogues, and women need to find their voices and articulate their voices more transparently. So for me, what stood out is that we should speak more, we should have more dialogue, and hopefully we don't preach to those who are in the church already, but you can find ways to make sure that it is transparent and that we approach all people and that we speak to everyone and that it becomes a culture, because there's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And isn't that true? So yeah, if there's a culture in a company that allows for transparency and for dialogue, I think you will be well away. It must be wonderful to then be part of a company like that, or industry. So you've got lots of work to do, but hopefully you'll get there to create a transparent culture.
Thanks, Marty. I really do hope that today is the first of many opportunities to make a difference within our mining industry. Christine, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I think just in terms of the research, I'm so excited about the research, and I'm looking forward to the final outcomes of the research. I think, you know, we ask ourselves, how are we going to sell this to management sometimes, because that's really difficult, and how are we going to convince others? And I think using something like a South African-based research where we say, this is actually a massive problem, because what I've found is, you know, when working with organizations, whether it's mining or otherwise, is they almost feel like it's an annoyance, sexual harassment, and to deal with it, you know. And if we can really go and we give them these statistics and we say, this is an actual problem affecting, you know, the people in your work situation, and also then, you know, effectively the bottom line, that really gives you an opportunity to, or empowers you to go sell this. And like Gary said, people aren't taking it seriously, and this is maybe an opportunity for them to have to take it seriously when they see the statistics. So I'm really excited about the research. As for today in general, it was so insightful. I think I've got so many different emotions that I'm feeling at the moment, but I think the one thing, as someone who's experienced sexual harassment before, I found that, you know, listening to the talks today and going through everything, I found that even though I know I shouldn't, I think I've minimized the effect and the experience. And, you know, to keep on, like, I don't know who kept on saying that we need to be courageous. So to be courageous and to act on it and to support each other when it happens, because it's so much more prevalent than we think. I think that's what I'll take away.
Thanks so much. And then, Bernai, do you have anything to add, especially around the research and the survey that Megan's done?
So I lost my Wi-Fi connection when Megan was talking about the research, so I completely missed all of that, and I only joined the session at 1:30, so I've missed a lot of what came before. But I think what I do want to pick up is on having courageous conversations and being courageous in reflecting in our own responsibility to sexual harassment, and just having kind of prepared for this and having to listen to some of the discussion now, what it really kind of causes me to get clear on is possibly how I've contributed to sexual harassment in the past, in bantering with people. I don't want to work in a world that's clinical and overly politically correct, but I do want to work in a world where people feel safe to be themselves. And there's no shortage of times where I've probably glossed over what could have been harassment and just bantered back, or chosen to hide away and go and eat something instead of consciously be aware of what somebody may have said or done to me. And really what I'm trying to say is we all need to consciously reflect on the roles that we take in how we show up in the world and how we speak to each other in sometimes very unconscious language, without understanding how that lands on other people. And to be courageous in reflecting on our own roles and on how we respond to others and allow or enable what's happening in the world that we live in. Thanks, Marlene.
Thank you. I'm now going to open the floor to our delegates, and please right now turn on your videos, jump in, add comments, ask questions, have a chat. We just want to hear your viewpoint and what you got out of it today.
And Nolene, is there another poll?
There is. I'm going to put this up while we continue this discussion. It's just to ask about how you found today. So having asked you to jump in and actually tell us about today, I'm just going to make it easy for you and put up this poll.
Thank you.
And I am now going to hand over to Megan.
Okay, well, while we wait for the people for our delegates to participate in this poll, I'd like everyone to switch on their videos and have a chat and say hi to the speakers, and to the speakers say hi to the delegates. Thanks for participating in my request, Bryony. Hi, Michelle. Oh, you're on mute.
I am not used to such silence when we've actually said talk.
But there's a whole bunch of geologists as opposed to women in mining.
Hi, Michelle. Felisso.
How's it, Nolene?
Thank you to everyone who's participated in sharing the survey on LinkedIn and adding extra talking points to it. Thanks.
Hi, Megan.
Well, hello, Sehu.
Hi everyone. It was a good day. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Thank you to all the speakers, Nolene and Megan for organizing, and the Wimster team as well. Thank you, guys.
I'm muting myself.
Yeah, it was really informative. Thank you, guys.
And thank you to Christine, who jumped in the last minute and said that she'll speak today. So bye, dankie, Christine.
It's a very big pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Has everyone participated in that poll?
No, we are sitting on 64%. So what we generally have done in the past is we have sent this out as a survey monkey after an event. But then the people have forgotten about the event already. So it's very important to us at the GSSA to understand what you're getting out of our events, whether we're on the right track, whether we're just regurgitating stuff that we've done for the last couple of years. And obviously through COVID, we had a very steep learning curve to move from physical events to our online webinars. I think we've done quite well on this. The fact that I don't have to leave Dahlstrom and go to Joburg to attend them is great for me. that we're really looking forward to getting back and having our physical events. Megan, I'm going to ask you to just do a closing, but we'll leave the meeting running for a bit if you want to have a chat.
Okay. Well, I would just like to thank everyone for attending this day. It's definitely a step in the right direction, as you know, all our speakers say as well. And thank you to our speakers for offering your time in preparing this, preparing for today and attending today. And I would say informing us all and educating us all and inspiring us all to do things differently and to be proactive and to encourage one another and to be courageous. And then I'd like to thank our sponsors, UCP Africa, GeoExplore Store, and MaxGeo, and then everyone at the GSSA for helping us, Marlies, Sally, Lally, and Nolene, and then everyone who was on the group to help make this day a possibility. Sarah wasn't here today, but I don't think she's out like saving a drill rig. And then Maria and Michelle. So thank you, everyone. It's been a very informative day for me and very comprehensive.